Senator Ludlam.
Thanks. I'll carry on in a similar vein. So where would we find approximate estimates of what those additional costs are likely to be?
So additional costs, well...
Of what?
Of closure, your wind-up costs, your staff entitlements.
I think we've got an indication there.
At this stage, we have not been requested by Treasury to do those estimates. Certainly at a board level, we do make sure we understand what liabilities are being incurred by the corporation that would have to be incurred in the event of a wind-up. So at the moment, we have back-of-the-envelope estimates only, and they are somewhat confidential because they do affect staff and what that means in terms of timing.
Okay, you can't table the envelope. Okay. Just to come back to where Senator Wong was, because there was...
Senator
yeah, go ahead.
Ludlam, it would be one of the first things that we looked at were once the bill received royal assent.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes, right?
Yeah.
The dividends...
Should the Parliament pass it?
Beg your pardon?
Should the Parliament pass it?
Yeah, and there's no guarantee that it will, but by the time that it does...
That's a matter for the Parliament.
Okay. I'm not clear, the dividends that you were expecting to pay back by 2015, are they completely hypothecated into ARENA, or do they just go back into general revenue?
They're streamed into ARENA. We haven't put too much thought into that because we've been busy building up our investment portfolio and managing our own costs and our commercial practices. But from my... Nigel might...
Yes. The way the accounting works is the interest that the CEFC earns comes to us, it goes back into the CEFC special account.
So what's the tie-up with ARENA then?
So the Minister, to the extent there are surpluses, can ask from time to time for those surpluses to be provided to ARENA.
Right.
Because ARENA is depleting a finite pool of capital, isn't it? It's not expected to make a return in the same way as you are.
No, and that's a very, very fundamental point, is that we aren't a grants organisation, and we believe very strongly in the discipline of debt, as we call it. As we do think that people who and participants who borrow money are going to be very cautious about applying that money to achieve the objective that they set out to achieve, whereas in certain circumstances, grant programs, because there is no obligation to pay the money back, may not involve the same level of we can't say the word responsibility, but the same level of requirements as what would be happening to loan borrowers who have a long-term obligation to continue to pay that loan off back to us.
I take your point. Of the roughly 3-to-1 ratio, as far as I can tell, of private capital that you've mobilised, do you have a rough idea of how much of that is domestic and how much of it's foreign investment?
That's an interesting question. I can take it on notice, but it was encouraging through this in syndicating some of these transactions that we have had 3 totally new foreign financial corporations coming in to participate, and they were out of China and Singapore, and I think they felt a certain encouragement to enter because there was a government-owned financier at the table.
I'm sure. So it's confidence-building measure apart from anything else.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you're taking notes, Senator Sendenis.
I've got my pen poised, Senator
Ludlam. So what happens because you're able to borrow at lower than the market rate, and that I guess is what gives you your advantage, as well as the fact that presumably your specialty will be in assessing risk in renewable energy projects, which doesn't exist in the commercial banks. What would happen if you disappear from the landscape? Because I'm presuming the government is going to make an argument that you're unnecessary, that the market will deliver. But just spell out for us what happens if you disappear.
Well, I can only say we probably go back to where we were. As I mentioned, someone in the industry said there's been more capital investment in this sector since we've been going than before we were there, so I'm only assuming we go back to what it was before we were there.
Okay. So you've only been signing cheques and assessing projects since 1 July.
Well, we've been assessing, Senator, projects for a longer period of time. We've actually only had the money to be able to release really since the beginning of July.
Okay.
But the impact of the shutdown of the CEFC would actually be quite broad at this stage. There is considerable uncertainty in the market. and the CEFC is playing a very active role in trying to enable people to continue to pursue transactions in an environment of uncertainty. So for many project participants, this will continue a trend which will probably see them not be able to finish projects that they would have liked to have finished.
Well, that's my real concern, I suppose. I don't completely understand how you are able to offer loans. I understand from your annual or from your report that there are 179 proposals for projects in the pipeline to an estimated total value of 14.9 billion. Stop me if these figures are unfamiliar.
No, they're correct.
What happens to those 179 projects if you disappear sometime in the next 6 months? How many of them will actually get built?
Well, naturally market forces will eventually take their shape, but the idea, the CFC was set up to deal with market imperfections following about 3 years of work, and I guess the reason it was set up is it was felt that there was a real market imperfection here that needed to be fixed, and the CEFC was the mechanism to fix it. So by removing us, effectively the industry will go back to where it was before, and projects that may have been developed may be delayed, and in an environment where many economies around the world are now taking positive steps to move from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy, potentially new industries that could have been built in Australia will not be built in Australia because they will find themselves falling behind other countries which are currently establishing institutions just like the CEFC. I mean, Bloomberg Energy Finance, I think, indicated that there's $58 billion being lent by equivalent agencies like the CEFC this year alone on the renewable energy sector, and about $109 billion in the energy efficiency sector. And countries from the UK, as you know, through to Japan, Malaysia, the US are all setting up similar institutions as they understand this transition is coming, and they want to position their own industry and their own economy to make the most of a transition and a change.
So that's a sector-wide view, and that's fairly dramatic. But what about the projects themselves? So the investments that you've made and the private capital that you've mobilised, is that enough to get all 179 of those projects built? Or if you disappear sometime in the next few months, what actually happens to that portfolio?
Senator, if I can just comment on that. One of the objectives of the CEFC was to develop the financial market for financing these transactions, not just sort of renewable energy, but energy efficiency, renewable energy and lower emissions. And both the employees and the board have been involved in a lot of financial market developments, and you just know they take a lot of time, and you've got to have very patient capital. And sometimes some of the private financial institutions don't have that patient capital and don't want to keep whole teams of people and build up the skills while they don't think anything's happening in the next 3 years. Right. So that's the danger of sort of discontinuity of public policy, in a sense, that you start building things and the market gets a bit of confidence and it starts thinking maybe we'll put people on and maybe these projects will proceed. And with those projects you do come down the cost curve because the constructors learn how to do it better, and it's starting something that then you stop, and exactly when it starts again through market forces could be quite a long time, but that's very hard to estimate. Okay.
Can you explain for us, and forgive me if this is in your report, but can you explain for me the time frame of the projects? Are most of them in the distant future, or are some of them, like how many of those 179 in your portfolio are actually in construction phase?
Well, Senator, I think the best way to describe it is that in relation to the 11 projects that we funded, they are all funded and they will be expecting to go into, if they're not in construction, they will be going into construction within the next 12 months. So that's of the money, of those ones that we have. In relation to the other projects within the pipeline, I mean, not all projects obviously within our pipeline are likely or are going to receive funding. We obviously are quite selective in terms of how we go about choosing projects. But at the moment, if I was looking at our pipeline, there's about 37 projects which are undergoing, reasonably detailed scrutiny that would involve about $2 billion, and that none of those are in construction at the moment because they don't have finance. and they will not enter, obviously, construction until such time as they have finance.
Well, how many of those projects are at risk, let's be blunt, if you disappear from the market?
I can't, precisely give you that figure.
Order of magnitude, half of them?
Well, it's not
I
just...
I think it's a timing issue. It's this market development that when you've got the market developing and you're coming down the cost curve and you've got the banks participating, then they stop doing that. They might stop doing it. They'll certainly go a lot more slowly. Will they stop for a few years? It's very much a matter of the signals and the strategy set by government in both energy and environment policy.
I feel
think
as
they
though-
take the signs from that.
No, I understand. I feel as though we're having two related conversations. One of them is about the sector-wide impact, and it sounds very, very dramatic that it really will throw the brakes on. But I'm also interested in the project-by-project dynamic, that you've got people lining up, or you're in the process of lining up and building that bridge, as you've kind of explained, between the proponent and the private capital.
Yes, well, while it's very hard, while we have been building that bridge and we've been very encouraged by what we've been able to achieve by establishing that bridge, it's also very hard. We didn't know when we started how receptive the market and the financiers would be to participating with us, and we've been very encouraged to find that receptivity, and how it will continue when we're not there, it's very hard to say, but we're certainly conscious that being an advocate and being a trusted financier with the project owners has been very effective.
Yeah.
And when you're not there, how much market development we've been able to achieve in our existence that is sustainable, it's hard to say.
It's hard to put a metric to, I guess. Well, I appreciate your candour. Following legal advice that you've received, I'm not asking for you to table a copy of it, but are you operating just as you would have without the hostility from government, or with, you've both observed up to now that lack of bipartisan consensus or cross-party consensus is problematic? Are you operating as you would otherwise have, or has this actually slowed or modified your activities?
No, we've had an open discussion with the government about this, and they've recognised our public responsibility and duties, and that we're going to continue investing the way we have. But just with the message that the market's getting about the interest in this sector, it's the market isn't so receptive as they were before, I suppose, both the co-financiers and the industry. So we're certainly consistent in everything we're doing, but it's a little bit more, the market itself is a little bit stepping back and reassessing, I suppose.
Understandable. So last one from me. Your Act provides $2 billion for you to commit each financial year. How much will be available to you in the months after the 1st of July 2014? Maybe if you could take that in two parts, how much of that $2 billion is committed, and what would be available to you post 1 July 2014?
Of the $2 billion, we have committed $536 million.
That was that figure at the outset, okay.
We have...
Excuse me, Chair, Gillian, I might just correct one thing there. Some of that $536 million actually came from Low Carbon Australia. So of the $2 billion, $482 million has actually been committed by the CEFC. Sorry, Gillian.
Thank you.
It's an extraordinary result.
It is.
Thank you.
So we have access to $2 billion per annum, and you said how much would be available?
I'm just interested in the 2014-15 financial year.
Oh, the 2014-15, then a further $2 billion would be available, because the design under the Act was that $2 billion per annum would be available for investment in this.
On the 1st of July?
In addition to any monies that are unspent and remain in the special account held by Treasury.
Do you have to have committed the $2 billion, or are you able to carry over?
We do not have to commit, Senator, the total $2 billion. In fact, in all of our forecasts, we were forecasting less than a $2 billion per annum commitment and less than a $2 billion per annum drawdown. The reality is it takes time in this market, and we are investing very prudently and making sure that the taxpayer is looked after here. So we don't want to just throw money at all investments.
Does it carry over, though?
It does carry over.
Thank you. Thanks, heaps, Chair.
Yeah, I know that